Shalom, shalom, and we're starting now a new part of the series of To Be a Jew, and we're entering now in the area where it has to do with our daily lives. And one of the things that's very important in our daily lives is, of course, the act of kindness. And we are looking at this fourth lesson, kindness, which is in fact a means and an end. The actual Hebrew word for kindness utilizes CHESED, because we all believe that Jewish faith and ritual observance aims for that main purpose, above all, to achieve perfection in the human relationship and to create a better society. At least this is what it holds to in theory. We must remember what the great sage summed up in the essence of Judaism, that what is hateful to you, do not do to others. It's actually a reformulation of this dictum came later to be known as the Golden Rule in Christendom. Rabbi Kiva at the beginning of the 2nd century said to love your neighbor as yourself, summarizing the essence of the whole Torah. When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asked his disciples to investigate which is the good way which a man should cleave, all answers in phrase of ethical terms. The answer appeared to him that was the most appropriate, which was that of Rabbi Eliezer ben Aroch, who said that a good heart, for this quality, said the Master, was inclusive of all others. When the Talmud speaks of characteristics of Israel, it does not do so in terms of a unique ritual observance and discipline, but rather it adopts the human criteria. And these characteristics three characteristics does the Jewish people possess. 1, merciful. They are more merciful. 2, they are modest. 3, they perform deeds of kindness. This according to Yevamot 79a. All who possess these three characteristics were considered worthy to become part of the children of Israel, the people of Israel. On the other hand, those who lacked these qualities were considered unworthy members of the people. Maimonides went so far, the Rambam in his Rabiah 1917, to say that when a person, there's reason to be suspicious of the Jewish credentials of a person who shows cruelty or is cruel. When this is indicated, we hear that the good heart, which is a prerequisite according to the Talmud, is truly for a pious and observant individual. Piety with the lack of a good heart is complete hypocritical. And this is why in today's religious society, many are seeing the meanness as in fact that counter affecting the way the religious society dresses and behave themselves. And it becomes a blemish not only to the whole individual, but to the whole society. So one who in fact aspires to be pious and saintly and holy, it tells us that let them fulfill the laws of Nezikin, Baba Kama 30. These laws had to do with monetary and had to do with civil and criminal matters. By the same token, acts of injustice, brutality, and dishonesty, and deception, slander, of unkindness are all against our transgressions against the religious dictums and the religious rule of law against God, and no less that they are also a crime against humanity. Think about this. When someone gives you a bad response, a negative response, what is that person actually representing? What is that person actually signifying to you in his whole total representation? Oh, obviously, is this a Jew? Oh, is this a convert? Oh, is this how the converts act and behave? So we begin to realize that, in fact, one of the essential aspects of being a Jew, behaving as a Jew, is this aspect of chesed. These are regarded as grave religious sins, and perhaps even more so in the ritual violation. Consider the Al-Chet confessional, which occupies a central place in Yom Kippur. It consists primarily of ethical and moral transgressions rather than ritual ones. The laws, for example, of Yom Kippur emphasize that God will forgive transgressions against himself, but will not forgive transgressions that is against our fellow men. In other words, we have an obligation to amend our ways and ask for forgiveness to that party that we have wronged or they have wronged us. The sages did not hesitate to dismiss the value of ritual observance if it came about as a transgression. A mitzvah, commandment, committing a transgression has no validity or merit. One who stole even a whole basket of wheat and yet scrupulously took from the dough the required amount for the tithe of the offering, in accordance with divine law, what blessing does he recite? Such a one is not to recite a blessing, but constitutes a curse. Similarly, when a Jew to be begins to act contrary to what his nature or essence is supposed to be, he becomes, you might say, a curse instead of a blessing. If someone studies Scripture and the Mishnah and attends the scholars and honest the business and speaks pleasantly to persons, what do people say concerning him? Well, fortunate is the father who taught him Torah. For this man studied Torah and looked how fine his way is, how righteous his deed is. But if someone studies Scripture and Mishnah and in relationship with people, what do they say about him? Oy vey, woe to him who studied the Torah. Woe to his father. Woe unto him who studied Torah. Woe unto his teacher. Look how corrupt, how despicable this way this man acts or this person acts. How ugly his ways. Point, you would even say, you know what, I would hate to be in your shoes in Judgment Day. This is what's stated in essence in Yoma 86a. For a religiously learned or ritually observant person to act in a way that would invite such a remarks is regarded as a Chilul Hashem, a profanation, a desecration of God's holy name. My friends, in those of you who are learning to become Jewish or to be a Jew, you need to focus on the concepts that we're talking about here. Because you will find many people, even in the Haredi world, the religious world, that basically exemplifies the 7 types of separatists or Pharisees or Perusians in today's society. And yes, my friends, they look very religious. They look so pious that their wear can actually fool you. So this is why the essence of these laws has to do with the character and behavior of your nature. And to change nature takes a divine interaction. What changes a person from being a non-Jew to a Jew? It's the Torah. The Torah is what perfects the soul, converts the soul. It is what changes a person from a regular, normal human being to one set aside for the purpose and role that God has for him or her. In emphasizing the divine priority, one Talmudic sage that the first question that a person is asked when he's brought to final judgment is, how have you dealt with integrity and faith? In other words, how have you dealt? How is your conscience, my friends? Are you involved with Ponzi schemes? Are you involved in ripping people off, even non-Jewish people? Then your conscience should be bothering you. Especially if you're a Jew and if you're wanting to become a Jew. There are 3 foundations which are essential according to Samuel David Lusat, a rabbinical scholar. Number 1, the foundation is of being compassionate, Rahmanis. The quality of Rahmanis or compassion is rooted in love and kindness and righteousness, and alone brings us to doing the good deeds without any ulterior motives. You do it because you want to do good. It's interesting to note that Rabbi Lusato mentioned that compassion, which is the root of love and kindness, is also the source of love, justice, and hatred of violence, and that from compassion. There will also be drawn forth of the idea of love for the righteousness and for justice. He sees this concept as an extension of the virtue of kindness and compassion. It's what is impressive and evidence in the aforementioned volume that he talks about in TZEDAKAH Mishpat. And this becomes the essence of the Jewish tradition, that if a person does not exemplify this in his daily life, in his quality as a person, then we have a problem. As a matter of fact, there are, according to Rabbi Soloveitchik, we read that there are three traditions in Masoret, three threads that have historical run through Judaism, and all being intrinsic to the very fiber of the Jewish faith. Number one, the first is the tradition of Torah. This is relating specifically to the intellect, to the rationale, to the reason, the knowledge. Number two, that which is called mitzvot, or the doing, maaseh mitzvot, the idea of observing and doing the commandments. And number three, the idea of regesh, the feeling, the kavanah, the emotion. One or the other, different rabbinical scholars say there's no denying that these three elements are completely indispensable. You can't compartmentalize these three elements. They're all three integrated in such a way that if you have one without the other, you don't have the whole entire essence of what Judaism is all about. The biblical call calls upon us to walk in the ways of God. That has been regarded from the earliest time to man to imitate the divine qualities of compassion and kindness. And let me say this, that this is not only something commanded to the Jewish people, but it's commanded to all peoples of all different walks. As it says in Now Israel, what does God require you? But to revere Him, to walk in His ways. Notice it doesn't say your ways or your thinking. To walk in His ways. Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 12. And what does that constitute as being walking in God's ways? The ancient source tells us that just as God is merciful, you be merciful. Just as God is full of kindness, you be full of kindness. Just as God is true, is emet, you be true and be emet. In other words, it is the imitation of God. And in so doing, we begin to reflect the divine qualities in our lives. As He fulfilled kindness and truth, so we, as it says in Shabbat, Talmud Shabbat 133b. The biblical book of the prophets of Micah also says it very clearly. He tells us, He has told you what is good and what God requires of you, but to act justly, to love kindness, to walk humbly before or with your God. These are three important characteristics that we are commanded to follow in that direction. And one which, unfortunately, it's not well balanced in today's practical Judaism. The Chafetz Chaim emphasizes that the entire Torah permeates by this concept of chesed, kindness. Without kindness, even any type of rebuff or reproof to a person will be taken wrong. The prophets of Israel also condemned the callousness of the people before human suffering and the inequities of social injustice when they reprimanded Israel for backsliding from the laws of God, the laws of Moses, and the divine commandments. It was not the temple sacrifice system itself which Isaiah and Jeremiah and Micah condemned, for they included prayer and singing and present-day type of worship in their criticism. What they condemned was religion that was reduced to nothing more, you might say, than lip service. It's just a routine. It's just a route. And when we get into that route, you have the daily routine of the traditional words, and it becomes meaningless. So we are to find in it meaning. And this is why it's very important, whether the worship is being in the form of sacrifice or prayers, or in the form of solemn assembly in ancient court time, or in the contemporary type sanctuaries, that when such essence or such sincerity lacks, there is an actual problem as to one's walk before God. Such a disregard of the divine commandments and man and his fellow man, they insist, makes a mockery of the commandment between man and his God, and regards him as if it was an abomination. God refuses to have that. He hates, abhors this. And this is why many of the Cheloni in Israel have such a passion of not wanting to attach themselves to the religious, because they have become ugly. They have become, in this aspect, yes, very pious looking. Talmud Sota speaks about these 7 types of Perushim, of religious piety people, who basically puts them out of the world to come, because they're a complete turn-off, not only to the humanity, but also to God. And unfortunately, it seems as it were, we talk about the other phase, Islam, for example, that they have been hijacked by the Islamofascists, as it were. But believe it or not, within our own Jewish Orthodox culture, we do have the same type of, you might say, Talibanism Jews that have taken the hijack the very essence of Judaism, the very aspect of kindness and love to our fellow Jew, and have turned it topsy-turvy. They made it into something that people don't want to be associated with. Simon the Just, Shimon HaTzadik, would say that there are 3 foundations the world stands on the Torah, on divine worship, and the acts of kindness. This is according to Pirkei Avot 1, verse 2. Acts of kindness are included in the Mishnah among those things which have no limits in Mishnah Peah. The continued emphasis upon justice and upon compassion and kindness over a long period of time without its result. For compassion and social justice became distinguishing hallmarks of Jewish communal life and even in centuries. In other words, there is not this aspect of kindness and serving. And let me address in many of these Sephardic communities, in particular in new communities starting up throughout the world. One of the things that we can learn even from other organizations such as Chabad and other Hasidic groups is the importance that on Shabbat at least, that it will be served in such a way that it brings joy to those who come and have a time for Shabbat. In other words, that they enjoy participating, and that there is food at the table in Hashem's house, or as part, as it were, of the final service to the community. Because the opposite reminds us of what happens when the children of Israel was on its way out of Egypt, and they were not treated neither with bread nor with water. Remember the story about the Amalekites. That action, that behavior, is what God abhors. Hospitality is included in this concept of kindness. Mercy is not to be an instrument to manipulate in a process of proselytizing fellow Jews, or to try to show differences between one and the other. Where compassion would serve to pervert justice and perpetuate wickedness, that Israel was cautioned against allowing noble sentiments to prevail. You shall not show respect or favor to the poor, nor honor to the person of the mighty, but in righteousness shall you judge. Leviticus 19, verse 15. Now, while the whole range of Jewish law may be classified on the basis of commandments, which we have to do in relationship with our Maker, the mitzvot of mitzvot shebain adam lemakom, the place where man are, our fellowship, the relationship with man, they're often very overlapping. If you see someone basically who's hungry, and you say, come and let's serve God, Give them some bread. Give them some food. How can you serve God without having the basic necessities? The enduring theme of Judaism is the quest of a good life. To do that which is right in the sight of man and God, sight of man and good in the sight of God. That's the Sefer Deuteronomy 12, verse 29. If one separates its ethics of righteousness and justice from the disciplines of kashrut and Shabbat, if one separates compassion and mercy for humanity from the discipline of religious family life, one does not understand nor live Judaism. The love of God cannot be separated from the love of man. Let me say this, I strongly feel this. There are many families today that are going through many hard times. And as a result, many families are going through divorces because of the financial pressures. It's a reality of today's time. No money, like I say, there's no honey. And when the members of the community goes to the shul or goes to their community and asks for help, asks for guidance, asks for the rabbi to intervene, to give an intervention to keep the families together, and they turn a deaf ear to that. That is an indifference of complete cruelty. And this is why this becomes a very important issue. If you are a leader of the community and there is an incredible demand, how can you remain silent before such an obligation? For this reason you were made a leader. You were put in a place of leadership. And if you do not give a word of advice, of a good word, and instead you turn over a bad, negative, despising word, we go back from the beginning, they're going to say, this man's Torah is corrupt, it's poisonous. My friends, there are many leaders in our community whose Torah is poisonous. I didn't say their ideas or concepts necessarily, but it stems from a poisonous source of Torah. They need to get into the sweet water and have their bitter waters turned into sweet. Act of kindness is a concept of chesed which includes all forms of kindness shown to a person, whether he exerts it himself or on behalf of another. To refuse all such service one may render a neighbor without himself suffering detriment is worthy of Sodom. Torah teaches us, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Therefore a person is bidden to praise the virtue of another in like manner that he would be praised for himself, and to be protected, be as a protective about his friend's asset as his own. Someone lost a very valuable piece of commodity in front of you, and you know who it belongs to. You have an obligation to safekeep it until you're able to return it. It's the concept that what is hateful to you, do not do to others, according to Hillel. It's a religious duty, a mitzvah, to extend hospitality of one's home and food and lodging as the need rise. It's a religious duty, a mitzvah, to visit a person who is taken ill. Friends or family who regularly see the sick person should visit him as soon as possible. Upon hearing the illness, one should wait at least a period of at least 3 days before visiting him. But there should be a visit. It's a religious mitzvah to visit a person in mourning and to comfort him in sorrow. It's also a great mitzvah to provide funds to enable orphan girls or very poor girls to marry. It's a mitzvah to personally provide for the return of a lost object, like I mentioned earlier, to its rightful owners. For it is written, you must surely return it, it says in Deuteronomy 22:1. One is required to protect the money and property of another from being lost, destroyed, or damaged. This falls within the observance of the biblical precept of returning a lost item. If one sees a neighbor whose life is in danger, he is also in a position to help and engage the help to help someone else. He is obligated to go to every trouble and expense to do so. Why? It tells us in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 16. If he refrains from taking such actions, he's transgressing this precept. You shall not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. Don't close your eyes. Don't shut your eyes before the need of your fellow man. Don't close your ears when they're calling for help. My friends, there are a lot of calls of help in today's world. How can we shut our ears and ignore this? Similarly, if one becomes aware of a conspiracy against another and continues to mind his own affair, nothing to reveal what is taking place, he also transgressed this biblical precept, you shall not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. Rabbi Yehoshua said, the evil eye, jealousy, the evil inclination, lust, and hatred of mankind puts a man out of this world. What is hatred of mankind? Whenever one says, love the sages but hate the disciples. Or love the disciples but hate the common people. This is the idea of fighting with the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov. It's the going towards one and favoring one and not accepting the other. This is what puts someone out of this world. Now, charity and kindness comes hand to hand, but in the words in Hebrew is different. The laws of tzedakah, or charity, literally means to establish or to do righteousness. Commonly signifies as charity. It's a trait of our seed, the seed of Abraham our father. And it is written, for I have known him that he may instruct his children and his posterity to do righteous, tzedakah, and justice. Genesis 18, verse 19. And let me say this, because a lot of people think this is only to the Jews. This applies, this idea of tzedakah includes all of the children of Abraham. Of course, we have the children of Abraham through Isaac, which is specifically given over certain promises. But this is also given over to the children of Ishmael, and it's also given over the children of Edom. And it's also given to all those who would hear the idea of establishing justice. You probably ask me, well, Moshe, do I have to give money or tzedakah to a person who's asking? Yes! According to your ability or means, or what you have available. How about the guy that's right there on the corner of the street coming down from the highway? He's drunk. And he says, he has a sign, I'm hungry, I haven't eaten. Are you supposed to give tzedakah? You have to give him something. The doing of righteousness and justice is preferable to the Lord than the sacrificial offering. Proverbs 21:3. Israel will not be redeemed except through the practice of tzedakah. Tzedakah v'chesed. Zion will be redeemed in justice, and her returnees with tzedakah. Yeshayahu chapter 1, verse 27. It's a biblical precept to give charity or tzedakah to the poor. It is written, if there be among you any needy person or one of your brethren, you must open your hand to him. What does it mean, open your hand? What does that concept mean, to open up your hand? It's asking for help. It's asking, please help me, I need. In Deuteronomy 15, 7 through 8, it says, you shall maintain him, whether a stranger or a sojourner. He shall live beside you. Leviticus 25:35. This includes even the convert, the one that I would even argue that even a righteous Gentile. We should be practicing this to all mankind. One sees a poor man seeking charity and turns his eyes away, and he avoids, like he's not wanting to look that he's there. You've just transgressed a biblical commandment. Do not harden your heart, nor shut your hand from your needy brother. You can't say no. Let me say that again. Don't say no to an opportunity that Hashem provides you to give charity or tzedakah. One must feed and clothe the poor of the Gentiles together with the poor of Israel. In other words, we are involved in Giving. If you give, we know that there is a principle throughout the biblical laws that it will be given back to you. If you loan to the poor, my people, as we're going to see in a few seconds, God will repay you back. This is why there are a lot of gemaks, or accounts, that's specifically earmarked to helping the poor and the needy. Every person is required to give tzedakah according to his means. Every poor man who is a recipient of tzedakah, every person is required to give a tzedakah, even if it would be a little. Sometimes the little pennies that a person gives, that's all he has, is more than sometimes some of the most wealthiest people give. How much tzedakah should be? How much should you give tzedakah? A median measure would be a 10% of your earnings. In today's time, it would be more 10% of your net earnings after they remove all the benefits. So whatever you get net, this is what you should give in, you might say, tzedakah. Now, there was a very interesting question, because a lot of people coming into Judaism, a lot of people coming in from Christianity or other Messianic communities, or basically from other systems of faith where they have to give their 10% to that local church or congregation. And if they don't give that, they are not in good standings as members. Well, Judaism does not see it the same way. The idea of maaser, as we know, some will argue, is no longer something that's applicable, but yet we see there is a biblical law that tells us that God promised that if you would test Him, He will open up the heavens for you. And Malachi talks about this. Now, of course, we can argue whether it refers to the actual agricultural tithing, or whether it refers to only specifically to Israel when Israel is in the land, or in fact whether it's even applicable today. But one thing we know for sure, that tzedakah, or giving aside, setting aside the 10% of your that's earning, provides an incredible blessing to people who are involved. And even if you do not get anything in return, there are other blessings that comes your way that you don't even realize, that it may not even be financial. It could be health. It could even be kapara. It could be so many different other ways it comes to you. Give tzedakah. The reason why our world is in the situation it is, because it needs tzedakah. We have not been giving tzedakah enough. As it says in the Talmud, there was a man who was very, very wealthy. In Christian literature, you know him as Nicodemus. In Jewish literature, it's Nicodemon. And interesting enough, this man was so wealthy that he was able to sustain all of Israel during the hardest times for over 28 years, all based on his wealth. And all that came to end when we read in the Talmud the story of his daughter, or one of the descendants of his, that basically had to beg just to be able for a morsel of food. And they asked her, well, what happened to all of the wealth? And the daughter explained, my father did not give enough tzedakah. Imagine that. Did not give enough. And this man was a giver. He was a major contributor. And those of you who perhaps in the Jewish world that's completely unfamiliar to what is in the Christian literature, to let you know, according to that source, he was a major contributor, yes, to this potential Messiah figure of the first century, who we know he was not, did not finish or fit the bill. But you should know this. Why? Because throughout Jewish history we have seen great contributors come from the Jewish people, wealthy people as well as poor people, contributing tzedakah, charity, for different causes, for different reasons. You have to give charity. It is to your own benefit. It is because through that you will receive blessings from above. I'm going to take the advantage and say, you know what? Give tzedakah to our organization, Ways of Israel, Los Caminos de Israel. I'm not going to be bashful and say, we do not ask for tzedakah. Some people are ashamed to be able to say that because they go, well, we We don't want to be like these Christian pastors on television, on TVN, and all these big, large ministries. That's embarrassing, asking for money. Do you not understand that when a person calls on others to give, that person is accredited much more, because he's calling people to do what is right, to give tzedakah. And it says very clearly in Deuteronomy 13, verse 18, all who show mercy, mercy shall be shown to them. As it is written, the Lord will be kind and compassionate to you, and he will multiply you. He will multiply you. My friends, you want to see some multiplication take place in your life, be it with children, be it with your business, be it with your monies, be it with whatever you put your hand on, start giving tzedakah. You see a need, help out. You see organizations asking help, give according to what you put in your heart to give. But give until it hurts. Give. You are not released from this obligation to give. There is no law that says you're free from giving, because God has given his whole entire world so that you can be able to give back to what he has created. My friend, gift giving to one another, mother, father, if they are needing such help, is regarded as an observance of the mitzvah of tzedakah, in addition to honor your father and your mother. Now, it is forbidden to turn a poor person empty-handed away. Even if he's given a small amount, you have to give something. Tzedakah should be given cheerfully and sympathetically. One who gives surely in this manner, and he gives, and even if it was in the gloomy expression like, oh my gosh, I gotta give, he loses the merit of his own deed and violates the commandment of the Torah, which says, and your heart shall not be grieved when you give him. Don't do this. Sometimes it's better not to give than if you give grievingly. I mean, obviously there's a benefit in giving, even if you grieve, because it's going to help somebody. But don't do it. You're losing out merit. This is what it says in Deuteronomy 15:10. It is forbidden to rebuke a poor man in anger, or raise one's voice to him when his heart is already broken. His spirit is crushed. Woe to him who puts a poor man to shame. I remember someone had asked a rabbi, you have someone in your community that needs some food, and this person didn't have a source to be able to provide. He says, well, you go ahead and give him food. The person did whatever he could in his possibility. And once even a third person is aware of a need, you cannot close your eyes or ears to that request. There are 8 degrees of levels of charity, each one higher than the other. And we're going to go real quick, starting from the 8th down to the 1st. The 8th degree of charity, from the higher levels, is when level of charity is given when one gives charity grudgingly, like we were talking about, grieving. The 7th is when a person gives less than he should, but he does so cheerfully. The 6th is when he gives it directly to the poor person upon being asked. He asked, I gave. The 5th level is when one gives directly to the alms to the poor without being asked. They're asking for money to help other people. The 4th is when the giving or the charity is given indirect. The recipient knows who is the giver, but the giver does not know the identity of the recipient. The 2nd is the second highest, is when the person gives is unaware of the recipient and in turn is unaware of the giver. This was when it deals with what they call charity funds, or funds in the communal fashion that's administered by responsible people. People who are in this category are in the 2nd level. The 1st level of giving charity is to help sustain a person before he becomes impoverished, supporting him, giving him a substantial gift in such a dignified manner that by giving him a gift that's large enough that he could be able to support himself, or by providing him and extending suitable loan, so by helping him to provide employment or establish himself in some own business, or make some unnecessary for him to become dependent upon others. In other words, to enable the person. It's the highest level of charity. To make it possible for a sage or scholar to do his work while to secure his livelihood, merits, and inheritance of the world to come. Now this I want to talk about because this has been somewhat abused in today's world. Everybody's a scholar, everybody's a sage, everybody has a work to be done. And it goes these certain levels that one of the ideas or whole heartfelt of the Rambam was never to put a burden upon the community. However, the community requires such a leader that they would have to support and sustain him. Wouldn't that be a wonderful idea that people would be able to sustain even our work that we're doing here? The work of the ways of Israel, Los Caminos Israel, where we could be completely dedicated to helping people come back to Judaism, helping people with this process of conversion and becoming Jews, helping people start and form new communities, which is actually what we're doing. We're doing it even not being fully employed through this wonderful medium of Facebook and the internet and this medium of mobile marketing and so many different ways of marketing. But yet, there is a need of a hands-on person to be able to teach and spend time with the people that's wanting to learn. To inspire and bring others to give tzedakah, as I mentioned earlier, is a great virtue and merits even greater reward than that of one who donates. Those who do this, is written, those who turn the many to righteousness shall be like the stars. That's right, we'll be like the stars. You're a star when you invoke and tell people, hey, you know what, you should donate to the ways of Israel. You should donate to Los Caminos de Israel. Look what they're doing. Look how they're affecting people. Look how they're bringing people to Judaism. Look as to how they're getting people out of the sheker world and bringing them in. Look at what we're doing. Not everybody is happy about it because it's causing all types of issues to arise. Yes, my friends, the synagogues, people are knocking on their door and the rabbis are closing the door on their face and saying, you're not welcome. That's reality. God is doing a great work and God's people are shutting the door on his great work. Can you fathom that? And yet this is why this book is one of the best sellers in Judaica books. To be a Jew. Because people are wanting to become a Jew. No, not to become a Noahide. Yes, there are many people, we're all Noahides. But they come to the point that they're no longer satisfied in that level. And they've knocked, and they've knocked, and they knocked, and they knocked. My friends, it's time to let the door open. Because when the door gets open, the floodgates and the promises that God has and has stated that you will be more, your descendants will be more numerous than the sands of the sand, and more numerous than the stars of the heaven. Wow! A pledge of tzedakah must be paid immediately. To be tardy, although one is capable, is in fact is a violation of what it tells us in the Torah. When you make a vow to the Lord your God, do not put off fulfilling it. Deuteronomy 23:22. Obviously, some of these vows can be, some of these things can be put aside depending on the intention and so forth, can be nullified. But by oral Torah, by the written Torah, is very clearly that if you put something in your heart and you propose to give Los Caminos de Israel $10,000, $20,000, $100,000, even $5,000, you put it in your heart. My friends, you got to give it. Time to pay up what you put in your heart to our organization. And I don't want to say this only to our organizations. There are many other organizations, Esha Torah, Sephardic organizations as well. Believe me, there's a big need of funding for many of these organizations. I'm including my organization as well. We have a big need. And yet, it's not being met. Maybe perhaps you want to be part of it. We welcome you. All the foregoing rules about tzedakah concerns themselves with the obligation and the duties of the donor. But there's also some rules that has to do with the other side, the recipients. One should strive not to become a public charge and not to become dependent upon others. The sages taught us that it's better to even give menial type of work than to depend on such charity. If one cannot subsist unless he does receive tzedakah, he should not hesitate to accept it. Don't be so proud that you cut yourself off from life-sustaining supports. It's a transgression. It's a religious duty, a mitzvah, to lend money to the poor. For it is written, if you lend money to any of my people, to the poor with you, which by the way includes the righteous Gentiles, which that's a little part that they have forgotten, because one of the aspects is that when a person was in the process of conversion, the costs that were assumed was very, very difficult, and therefore they had to be supported, sustained somehow. Even though Scripture says if our sages regarded this, it is as if rather than when. It is a win when you lend money to my people. As a permissive act, but not an obligatory act. It is, and I see it as an obligatory act. We are to lend. We are to help. We are to give. If you get the message, God is saying, you're my people. You have to reflect my qualities. You have to reflect my kindness. You have to be like me, so when people see that they're hurting, they can see me through you. The mitzvah of lending money to the poor is greater than the mitzvah of giving tzedakah to those who ask. My friends, I need some people that can go out there and knock on doors and say, you know what? Our Los Caminos Israel needs your support. We need your financial contributions. Yes, we need $1 million. Yes, we need $5 million. Yes, we need $20 million. Why not? Do you understand how many people we can help with such contributions? You have no idea the amount of people that knock on my door, and I just remain quiet because I'm unable to be able to fulfill the needs, the mass amount of needs that come knocking on my door. There are many, believe me. And through this means, it just multiplies much more. It is forbidden to press for the return of a loan when one of the borrowers does not yet possess the means to prepay it. The Torah says they shall not be to him as creditor. Exodus 22, verse 33. Now I wonder why a lot of Gamaks have made this as their main caveat. This is not the Oraita, my friend. You have a nice little loophole created in order to get out of it, but this is one of the issues why we're seeing such consequences taking place upon the world. My friends, everything that's happening in the world, yes, my friends, you can blame it on us Jews. You have to blame it on us Jews, because we have an immense responsibility before HaKadosh Baruch Hu as well as before the world. And when things go awry, it's because things are going awry within our people. My wine is bitter, but it's my wine. And thus I have that right to be able to express what I'm saying. Now, as part of the kindness, we're going to get into the laws of slander and deceit. But let me say this very clearly. We should not oppress your neighbor. I'm going to stop here with this class because this aspect of kindness will continue, and we're going to run right into kindness to animals, acts of justice, the middle of the road, and then that will be the second part of actually lesson number 5 of this class. Shalom, shalom, and look forward to hearing back from you. And remember, if you wish to contribute to the Los Caminos Israel, Ways of Israel, you can send us a letter, an email, rabbiotero@yahoo.com, or you can go to our link on PayPal, look for us at Los Caminos de Israel @yahoo.com. And yes, we do accept any amount of contribution for this cause. The need is great. You'll see also our pushkas. If you would like to have one ordered, I'll be more than happy to send it, but please send in a contribution so we can pay at least for the mailing of the pushka cans to your home address. Shalom, shalom, and I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.